Thakur Indriyebhya Brahmana Manasastu Para Budhir Yo Budhe Paratas to Saha. The working senses are superior to dull matter. Mind is higher than the senses. Intelligence is still higher than the mind, and he, the soul, is even higher than the intelligence. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The senses are different outlets for the activities of lust. Lust is reserved within the body, but it is given vent through the senses. Therefore, the senses are superior to the body as a whole. These outlets are not in use when there is superior consciousness or Krishna consciousness. In Krishna consciousness, the soul makes direct connections with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, the hierarchy of bodily functions, as described here, ultimately ends in the Supreme Soul. Bodily action means the functions of the senses, and stopping the senses means stopping all bodily action. But since the mind is active, then even though the body may be silent and at rest, the mind will act. Let me read that again. But since the mind is active, even though the body may be silent and at rest, the mind will act, as it does during dreaming. But above the rest, in other words, but since the mind is active, then even though the body may be silent and at rest, the mind will act, as it does during dreaming. But above the mind is the determination of the intelligence. And above the intelligence is the soul proper. If, therefore, the soul is directly engaged with the Supreme, naturally all other subordinates, namely the intelligence, mind, and senses, will be automatically engaged. In the Kathopanishad, there is a similar path in which it is said that the objects of sense gratification are superior to the senses, and the mind is superior to the sense objects. If therefore the mind is directly engaged in the service of the Lord constantly, then there is no chance that the senses will become engaged in other ways. This mental attitude has already been explained. Param dristva nivartate. If the mind is engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord, there is no chance of its being engaged in the lower propensity. So this verse, param dristva nivartate, means that when one gets a higher taste than simply sense gratification, then one can control the mind and the senses. And it says, if the mind is engaged in transcendental service to the Lord, there is no chance of its being engaged in the lower propensities. In the Katha Upanishad, the soul has been described as Mahan, the great. Therefore, the soul is above all, namely the sense objects, the senses, the mind, and the intelligence. Therefore, directly understanding the constitutional position of the soul is the solution of the whole problem. Therefore, directly understanding the constitutional position of the soul is the solution of the whole problem. With intelligence, one has to seek out the constitutional position of the soul and then engage the mind always in Krishna consciousness. Okay, the constitutional position of the soul is soul is part and parcel of Krishna, the Supreme Personality Godhead. Therefore, our real duty in life is to serve the Lord because we are part and parcel of the Lord. We're not something separate from the Lord. That's why it says, with intelligence, one has to seek out the constitutional position of the soul and then engage the mind always in Krishna consciousness. That solves the whole problem. What's the problem? The problem is a mind that's always being disrupted and going from here to there and everywhere. It's not controlled at all. The neophyte spiritualist is generally advised to keep aloof from the objects of the senses. But aside from that, one has to strengthen the mind by use of intelligence. If by intelligence one engages one's mind in Krishna consciousness by complete surrender unto the Supreme Personality Godhead, then automatically the mind becomes stronger. And even though the senses are very strong, like serpents, they will be no more effective than serpents with broken fangs. Very nice example.
Mm-hmm.
But even though the soul is the master of intelligence and mind, and the senses also still, unless it is strengthened by association with Krishna and Krishna consciousness, there is every chance of falling down due to the agitated mind. Let me read that again. But even though the soul is the master of the intelligence and mind, and the senses also, still, unless it is master of intelligence and mind, I'm sorry, and still, unless it is strengthened by association with Krishna and Krishna consciousness, there is every chance of falling down due to the agitated mind. Wow. Well, uh, this is the problem that many people have. They lose control of the mind, and the mind is wandering here and there and everywhere uselessly, and it's hard to control the mind and keep it focused on Krishna. Oh, and it says, but even though the soul is the master of intelligence and mind, and the senses also, still, unless it is strengthened, meaning the mind, by association with Krishna and Krishna consciousness, there is every chance of falling down due to the agitated mind. Haribol. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Well, the solution to this problem is stated here. It says, therefore, directly understanding the constitutional position of the soul is the solution of the whole problem. What's the constitutional position of the soul? We're the eternal servant of Krishna. And if we act like that by being engaged in devotional service without any hiatus or without any interference or stoppage, then we can control the mind. So directly understanding the constitution of the soul is the solution of the whole problem. Yes. What is the constitutional position of the soul? Soul is part and parcel of Krishna. It's not part and parcel of the material body or the uh, you know or any other material identification. the soul is the part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. And therefore, understanding the constitutional position of the soul is the solution of the whole problem. What is the whole problem? This ability to control the mind and the senses. Okay. Uh, one interesting statement here is that if therefore the mind is directly engaged in the service of the Lord constantly, that's the main word, main points, constantly, then there is no chance that the senses will become engaged in other ways. This mental attitude has already been explained in Param Dristra Nivartate. This means that when you get a higher taste, then you can control the lower, let's say, desires or tastes or whatever. So how do you get that higher taste? Param Dristra Nivartate. It's by associating with advanced devotees who can give you a taste of becoming free from Maya's tricks. When someone does not follow the regulative principles, Prabhupada says, then the mind plays tricks on the living entity. That's a great statement by Srila Prabhupada. If we don't follow Krishna consciousness strictly, then the mind plays tricks on us. Yeah. So it becomes agitated, and then we become attracted to sense gratification. So it starts, even though it's our mind, but if we're not following Krishna consciousness, we will not be able to control the mind. And at that point, the mind will play tricks on us and begin to imagine things. Like, for example, one major trick of the mind is people thinking that they can go to the moon. It's a complete, uh, it's a complete hoax. They're never going to be able to go to the moon or to Mars. They can try, but they'll never be able to do it. So there are other things like that. People think that eventually they will find a solution to old age, disease, and death. Impossible. They'll never find that solution. You might be able, people may be able to prolong the period of life of the material body a little bit, but it's never going to be eternal. The material body is a material body. It's subject to birth, death, old age, and disease. So all these attempts, futile, futile attempts by scientists and scholars are will of the wisp. Look that up. Will of the wisp. Will of the wisp. They're just tricks of the mind. Uh, the will of the wisp. They get these sort of impossible ideas in their mind, and then they spend millions and millions of dollars and most of their life pursuing these undoable theories. And it's basically a waste of time and money. Will of the wisp. What is
It is
that?
the flickering or glowing light that appears in marshes and swamps for us usually at night. It's been attributed.
What?
It's like the fairies that lead the travelers astray.
Yes. It's something illusory.
Illusory.
Yeah. Okay. So it says here Therefore, the soul is above all, namely the sense objects, the senses, the mind, and the intelligence. Therefore, directly understanding the constitutional position of the soul is the solution of the whole problem. All right. What's the constitutional position of the soul? It is the part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, if we understand that, being the part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, therefore, our real vocation should be to engage in the service of the Lord. All the other services, serving the country, serving your dog, serving this thing, that thing, is basically it's like a bridge that leads to nothing. There have been bridges that lead you to nothing. Sometimes the politicians, they have so much money, they'll build a bridge that goes nowhere. They'll go to like a an island where nobody lives, right? So you don't really need a bridge to that island, right? But sometimes they spend the money because they get the money and they have to spend it. So they'll build a bridge to nowhere. Look that up. And believe me, politicians have done it. A bridge to nowhere, or a bridge to an island where there's no people. So with intelligence, one has to seek out the constitutional position of the soul and then engage the mind always in Krishna consciousness. Yes, what does it say?
Here, the phrase "a bridge to nowhere" is often used metaphorically to describe an initiative, project, or structure that seems purposeless or fails to achieve its intended goals. It typically implies wasted effort or resources, as the bridge either does not connect to anything useful or leads to an unfinished, unnecessary destination.
Right. Yeah, there are examples of that. Sometimes these politicians, they get a lot of money and they got to spend it. So they'll build a bridge to some island or something. So, but when you get to that island, there's nothing there. There's just a just an island, right? A bridge to nothing. Okay, all right. So with intelligence, one has to seek out the constitutional position of the soul and then engage the mind always in Krishna consciousness. Well, first you have to seek out the constitutional position of the soul. How do you do that? Well, you have to come in contact with uh, genuine devotees. They can help you understand the constitutional position of the soul. The soul is the part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is not separate from the Lord. We are part and parcel. Part and parcel means that we have we're connected to the Lord. That means we're the part, right? But it's a parcel. It's not. We're not equal to the Lord. And if the fact that that's our real identity, we are part and parcel of the Lord, but we're not equal to the Lord. So therefore, our real purpose in life is to serve the Lord, because that's who is our let's say origin. We've all come from the Lord. Therefore, we're meant to serve the Lord. When we don't serve the Lord, then we serve all the whims of the mind, and and basically start doing things that are impossible to achieve, such as trying to find the elixir of immortality. And that won't happen. But people are looking for it, spending sometimes millions of dollars. So previously, they were, some people thought, in, like, 500 years ago, that the elixir of immortality was in Florida. So they 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 built these boats, the big boats, and the ships from Europe went to Florida looking for the elixir of immortality, which they never found, of course. Now, that elixir of immortality, they're trying to do it with nanotechnology or other types of futile experiments and so forth. You're not going to, the body will never be immortal. The soul is immortal, of course, but the body will never be immortal. So to try and find a way to make the body immortal is a complete waste of time and money and energy of the living being. So, but that's what they're trying to do. And they're promising people, oh, well, by 2050, death will be optional. Look that up. By 2050, death will be optional. What's the name of the guy?
Ray Kurzweil.
Yeah. What is it again? Roy.
Yeah.
Roy Kurzweil. Huh? Ray Kurzweil. Yeah.
It's 2045.
Ray.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ray Kurzweil.
Ray Kurzweil.
Kurzweil. Kurzweil.
Okay.
A futurist and a prominent
futurist. It's the dumbest. The dumbest futurist. Go ahead.
We'll have to wait and see what his future is.
Yeah, his future is really bleak.
A prominent advocate of the singularity.
Singularity means by 2050, the super computers will be equal to human beings. That's what the singularity is.
Moment when AI surpasses human intelligence.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
It's already surpassed.
Well,
no, it hasn't.
No, the only thing is that consciousness is not there. They cannot invent consciousness.
Yeah.
Oh, nobody can invent consciousness.
So here it is.
Okay.
He has predicted that death could become optional by 2045, thanks to advancements in biotechnology, artificial intelligence, and nanotechnology. His belief is rooted in the idea that technology will soon enable humans to radically extend their lifespans or even achieve a form of immortality.
A form of immortality. What does that mean? A form of immortality?
So some of his predictions. There is the technological singularity. Kurzweil predicts the singularity, a moment when AI surpasses human intelligence, will occur around 2045. This will lead to exponential advancements in medicine, biology, and human machine integration. Longevity, escape velocity. Kurzweil envisions a point where medical technologies advance so quickly that they will extend life faster than aging occurs. This concept, often referred to as longevity escape velocity, means like it's the moment when the rate of innovation will allow us to overcome the rate of death.
These are all words.
And could effectively render death optional for those who can access such technologies.
All nonsense. All nonsense.
Nanotechnology and cellular repair. Microscopic robots, nanobots could be developed to repair damaged cells, reverse aging, and enhance the human body, essentially curing mortality from physical degeneration or disease. Mind uploading. Caswell also speculates that human consciousness, for him, my consciousness means mind. I think therefore I am. So he's the follower of that philosophy. Human consciousness could eventually be uploaded to in digital formats, allowing people to exist independently of the biological bodies.
Independent of the biological bodies. What? That means they're a robot.
Without body, how can he exist?
No, they have a robot body.
Your thought process they capture and then they say,
It's a
okay,
matrix.
this is Sadhachari Prabhu, think like Sadhachari Prabhu, and then there will be a robot or always things like you.
No, but that's not me.
Yeah, they download your intelligence or your mind
Okay.
into a robot.
Uh,
They think
Yeah.
that
But the
they'll be able to
experience,
do
you
that.
won't be experiencing.
Mhm.
The
My-
people will, it's like,
That's a virtual reality.
yeah, they mix all these definitions just to make it look.
How do you spell his last name?
Kurz,
Q?
Kur,
Yeah, K-U-R. Okay, wait a minute. K-U-R-Z.
Weil.
W-E-I-L.
Kurzweil.
K-U-R-Z-W-E-I-L. He's a Jew, that guy.
So first of all, they should explain what is the difference between a living body and a dead body. It's the same thing.
Well, a living body is conscious, a dead body is not conscious.
Yeah.
But their definitions are different. I think
Different than that?
I mean, there is probably a video. I'll find that if I can. There were all these scientists, particularly working on the AI.
Yeah.
We discuss what is human consciousness. Let's see if I can find
Okay,
it.
good.
Give me 1 minute.
They're still researching on that.
That's like the bridge that goes to nowhere.
No.
You spend all that money to build the bridge, and it goes to nowhere. It goes to an island where there's nothing. And that has happened. You have these politicians that get a lot of money. They don't know how to spend it. So they build a bridge that goes to an island where there's nothing.
I'll play this one, right?
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll share this screen.
Is it a
They're not getting the audio.
No, we are
One
not getting audio.
people on online, you're not getting the audio.
No, we are not getting.
Let's see, why is that not? Oh, because it needs to play from a different one second.
They start out right from the beginning and says, we don't know what consciousness is. They're going to try and tell us what it is.
Okay, let's see if this.
And that's in light of the fact that each.
Did that?
Yeah, it fixed.
Okay. All right. Let's play. Okay, I'm going to. You guys missed the main
starting point. So let's see.
So thank you so much for joining us this evening for this exploration of consciousness in the age of artificial intelligence. And look, in any discussion of consciousness, it is important to get one thing straight at the outset. We do not know what consciousness is. And that's in light of the fact that each of us, I think, but I do not know for sure, each of us can attest to what the experience of consciousness is, what consciousness feels like. And some of us can further attest through meditative practice or chemically induced modifications, can attest to what altered states of consciousness are like. But we are still very much in the dark regarding how it is that configurations of material particles that themselves do not seem to have any kind of inner world, they somehow in aggregate generate inner worlds of phenomenological experience. Now, look, some will consider
So he's saying like somehow these material things, they don't have a conscious, become living. So he's still at that
What he
level.
doesn't understand is there's some God though.
Yeah, God and souls there.
I phrased it with undue bias. They'll say, it is not that matter makes mind, but rather that mind makes matter. Or in another variation, mind transcends matter. Or in another variation, matter, even at the level of fundamental ingredients, does contain the seeds of consciousness, containing something that some have called proto-consciousness. Now, these issues are surely deeply compelling in their own right? I mean, consciousness is utterly essential to life as we experience it. But in recent years, these issues have become yet more central because, as we all know, we are living through a transition in which artificial intelligences of various flavors, they are becoming ever more present, raising the question of the insights we might glean by thinking about consciousness in this era of artificial intelligence. And to discuss these issues, I am pleased to bring in two guests who have really spent decades immersed in these very questions, trying to gain insight into thinking about the process of thinking. So first we have David Chalmers, who is University Professor of Philosophy and Neuroscience and co-director of the Center for Mind, Brain, and Consciousness at New York University. His most recent book, Reality Plus Virtual Worlds and the Problems of Philosophy, was named one of 2022's best books of the year by the Washington Post.
Idiot number one.
And Seth, who is a professor of cognitive and computational neuroscience and director of the Center for Consciousness Science at the University of Sussex. He is editor-in-chief of Neuroscience of Consciousness, and his book, Being You, A New Science of Consciousness, was a Sunday Times top 10 bestseller.
Idiot
Congratulations.
number two.
So, before we get into some of the details, I'd like to just get a real quick sense of where each of you is coming from. I think I know the answer, but just even if you want to give a yes or no, that would be good enough.
This one,
That an
45
artificial
minutes.
system will ever be conscious.
I think it's possible for an AI system to be conscious. I think it's possible for a machine to be conscious. The brain itself is a big machine. Somehow that machine produces consciousness. We don't know how.
Somehow.
Somehow. I think if biology can do it, I don't see why silicon can't do it. I can't see. We don't understand how silicon could give us consciousness. We also understand how neurons could give us consciousness. So I don't see a difference in principle.
So that's a yes.
That's a yes.
Take it. Absolutely. And yeah, how about you?
I'm going to give the annoying "it depends" answer. It depends on what we mean by AI. So I think for the kinds of AI that we have at the moment, I think it's very, very unlikely. It can't be ruled out.
Yeah.
But I think that we overestimate the possibility because we conflate consciousness with intelligence, and we have still this pervasive idea that computation of some sort is the basis of consciousness.
Yeah.
And I think that is really a really shaky assumption. I agree with Dave that I think consciousness is, if you like, an achievement of a biological machine, but to call it a machine, to call the brain a machine, it's a very different kind of machine. And it may be the kind of machine that silicon stuff just cannot
emulate. Yeah. All right, so let's just get into a little more detail. So famously, and I know that you've been asked this question so many times that you probably recoil at it, but in 1995, you coined the term, the hard problem of consciousness, which for many people, certainly I include myself in that, crystallized why this is such a conundrum. So can you just give us a short summary of what you mean by the hard problem?
Sure, and I should say this was never an original observation. I think, everybody knew in their bones that consciousness posed a hard problem. This label just kind of crystallizes the problem and makes it a bit harder to avoid. But, you go to a conference on consciousness and you find people talk about many different things. Sometimes it's just used for the difference between being asleep and being awake. Sometimes it's used for the ability to control your behavior in certain considered ways. Sometimes it's used for the ability to report certain internal states. But I think where consciousness is concerned, those things are actually what I call the easy problems, not because it's straightforward to explain them. It's probably about as hard as anything in ordinary cognitive neuroscience, but we've got a paradigm for explaining those things. You come up with a mechanism that produces appropriate behavior, say behavior typical of a wakeful person, and you'll have explained the difference between being asleep and being awake. But when it comes to the hard problem of consciousness is subjective experience. You gave a great gloss on this in your introduction. It's the feeling of experience from a first person point of view, the feeling of seeing and hearing, the feeling of feeling your body and emotions, pain, the feeling of thinking, the feeling of acting, all the stuff that we experience subjectively. And what makes it hard is those paradigms that we have in science, and especially in neuroscience and cognitive science, for explaining things in terms of mechanisms that do a job in producing behavior, doesn't seem to work for subjective experience. There always seems to be a gap. Explain, sleep versus wake.
What's a God?
It's a gap, he said.
A gap.
Yeah.
Explain report versus not. There's still the question, why is it subjectively experienced? Seems to need a new method. That's why it's a hard problem.
And there I think we're many, and I'm really thinking of my own journey in appreciating the depth of this problem. There was a time when I would hear things like that and say, it's just a matter of figuring it out. It's just a matter of understanding how the brain works better, fuller, more completely. And once we have that, somehow this explanation for phenomenological experience will emerge. And then I encountered this little thought experiment, which I think had a big impact on you too, and maybe Neil, I don't know if you as well. This thought experiment about Mary from Frank Jackson, and we have a little version of it that I'll quickly play, and then maybe I can have you both comment on.
I used to listen to this guy before. It's nonsense. It's a waste of time.
Yeah, it's basically like,
It's just playing games.
So first of all, they're stuck just between the mind and matter. They don't have this hierarchy that we just, in fact, the current verse talks about this hierarchy. The God, the soul,
Well,
intelligence.
right here. So this, But I'm just drawing the art. If the mind is engaged in the transcendental service, there is no chance of being engaged in the lower propensities. In the Katha Upanishad, the soul has been described as Mahan, the great. Therefore, the soul is above all, namely the sense objects, the senses, the mind, and the intelligence. Therefore, directly understanding the constitutional position of the soul is the solution of the whole problem. Now, did these guys talk about a soul?
That's why they're clueless, because they're stuck in this lower dimension.
Yeah, they're clueless, exactly. That's a
Yeah.
good word.
Yeah.
They're just talking around the subject. It's like, you know, you have three people in the room, but two of the people are ignoring the third person, right? As if he doesn't exist. Right? So what they're ignoring is the fact that there is a superior person named God who has, you know, made everything work. And but they ignore that. They're just going around in circles, talking this and talking that, but never getting to the point.
Yeah, they do their research up to a certain point only. They still don't know how human body is generating energy. They go to that molecular level. They go to adenine triphosphate or something. But if we ask how that molecule is getting energy, they are still researching on that.
Well, they say food, eating
No.
food.
But if you give food to a lump of chemicals, it's not getting energy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, definitely for us with this knowledge, all this looks so silly.
yeah,
And
everything is there in the universe.
these
These are
are
not my
very well-regarded scientists, and there's a conference all these people are speaking at. But it's, I think Prabhupada somewhere gives the analogy like a bunch of chickens, headless chickens.
No, nobody is talking
You know, a
about
headless chicken can run around sometimes for weeks.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
look that up. They cut off the head of a chicken and it doesn't
yeah.
die. It runs around.
Wow.
The headless chicken. The headless chicken syndrome of a scientist. It is running around without any brain, without a head.
A real life head chicken that survived 18 months without its head in 1945.
See? Chickens can run around. You cut their head off and they still keep running around. How long did it?
I don't know, but this is, I don't think this is a common phenomenon, but apparently this happened in 1945. It's called the Mike the Headless Chicken. A real life chicken that survived for 18 months without its head in 1945. However, this is an extreme and rare case rather than the norm. You know, first of all, why do chickens move after being decapitated? When chicken's head is removed, it can exhibit reflexive movement for a short period, few seconds to minutes. Reflexive nerve activity. The spinal cord contains neural circuits that control basic motor functions, allowing chicken to move its legs or wings even without signals from the brain. And then there is a residual oxygen in tissues. The muscles and nerves still have some oxygen. So there's a life activity. But 18 months, how did it eat then?
It's a good question.
Mike the headless chicken, like Mike's extraordinary survival happened because the farmer's axe missed the critical part of the brain stem.
Oh,
leaving enough of it intact to control basic bodily function
like
like
eating.
There's some kind of,
yeah.
it happens with the.
No, but, and it was fed through a dropper and carefully tended to by the owner. So after,
Oh, okay.
so it was, yeah.
But the tail of lizard, even though it detaches, it looks like it has life.
Is it for long or is it just
It
for
grows
short?
again.
Yeah.
It grows another tail.
Yeah, it grows another, but the detached tail,
Yeah.
it
It has its own life.
yeah.
Yeah.
And some earthworms also, if we cut it,
Yeah.
the two parts will have like.
They're both to stay alive. A lot of interesting things in nature.
No, it's
Okay,
also
so
same thing. For a shorter period of time, it has the reflexive movement.
Earthworms.
Yeah.
you're looking
Earthworm, whether the detached piece of an earthworm continues to live or regenerate.
oh yeah, the earthworms, yeah.
The front half,
You cut them in half and it becomes two worms. Both halves live.
no, but this second half all eventually dies. The first half will continue.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't have the regenerative function and life. Very well.
Okay, so any questions anybody have?
So, whereas meeting with a devotee is the main thing, right? Until then, the soul will remain
Meeting with what?
a devotee, a
Okay.
qualified devotee.
All right.
So until then, the soul is inferior to senses or the right.
Yeah. It doesn't
What do you
realize
mean
its position.
it's
Subjected to
well, the mind is playing tricks on a person that engages in sense gratification.
that time the soul is actually inferior to all other components.
Well, the soul is the root of the consciousness, right? But when you are contemplating sense gratification all the time, then you're not under the control of the soul. You're under the control of this illusory concept of sense gratification.
So that means at that time soul is not superior,
It's not in
No,
control.
it's the ignorance.
not in control.
Yeah, no, the soul is still in control, right? Because that's how the life is maintained. And
No,
the super
this
soul,
verse says soul is superior to all of the
correct.
components.
It's always superior, but when you are
the
in
person
ignorance,
is in sense gratification, if soul is superior, then he will not do the sense gratification.
they will be in the ignorance of the function of soul. Like, for example, all these scientists, right?
Yeah, that's
they it's not like their soul is not operating. The
it's
soul
operating, but it doesn't have that superior power to control the senses and the mind and intelligence. It remains subtle
false ego.
until the person meets a devotee.
As long as a person is addicted to sense gratification, they will not be able to figure out, what is the real purpose of life.
It's all illusion.
Yeah, they'll chase, what is it called? The phantoms of illusion.
And that's the glory.
like, for example, I mean, there definitely people or scientists are experimenting how to make the body immortal. That is impossible. So they say, well, we want to increase the duration of life, and eventually we'll attain immortality of the body. You see, all that's a complete false narrative. They'll never do that. Just like they say, well, we're going to go to the moon. But they're never going to go to the moon. They can try as all they want. They'll never make it. Why? Well, even if you make it, you can't really live there.
Yeah.
Right? Because our body is constituted differently than the atmosphere of the moon. So they're trying to do things that are impossible and spending millions and millions and millions of dollars. Like the moon, going to the moon. You know how much money they've spent going to the moon? Why don't you look that up?
They are going to come back.
Huh?
They are going to moon to come back to Earth.
So I think when they did the first time, last time we saw it's like $150 billion at that time.
At that time. Yeah. Yeah, so look at all the money they're wasting. And what do they have to show for it? Very little. Right. And now they're trying to go to the moon again.
Yeah.
Right. So you see, this is, when you spend, how much money they spend to go to the moon? Like $20 billion or something?
I think last time it was $150 billion.
$150 billion. Look how good they could have done with that money.
Yeah, that was at that time. So that's like pretty.
That's even more now, yeah. So, they're just wasting time and money. But why would they do that? Well, it's a way to make money for the scientists. And, they get bigger. It's just like, every year there are
trying to collect money for education. And people will give the money. And, they'll tear down an older building and put a brand new building. Right? But does it help the education of the kids? No, it doesn't. You know how much they spend on education? I mean, it's a phenomenal amount of money. And in the end, most kids don't get a good education in the United States. Right? But yet, there's huge, let's say, a huge amount of money is being built and being given to the educational system to build new schools, and but the education of kids is not improved that much, even though they have so much money.
It's not meant for the common man. It's only for certain people who have that skill to develop new business or new technology. I think like that. The government is not giving free education for all common man. It's their main purpose is to generate business from the business.
Well, I mean, look, they're spending huge amount of money for the schools. Every year they collect a lot of money for schools. But is it helping? Is it actually educating kids? I say. Yeah, it educates them to be sense gratifiers, but it doesn't really educate them. So they make mistakes. They become doctors and lawyers and all these things, but ultimately, they're ignorant of their relationship with God. Now, let's say you go to a Catholic school. So, I mean, I've gone to Catholic schools and good lectures. And the kids, they look exactly the same as the kids in the public schools, right? Because boys and girls have there are boys have girlfriends in the Catholic school, right? And they're just almost exactly the same as the boys and girls in the public school. Even though they're getting some spiritual training, and they have to go to church for, I don't know, half an hour a day, something like that. But it doesn't look like they're any more intelligent than the kids in the public schools. Why don't you look that up? Are children, are the kids educated in Catholic schools? Do they come out being more intelligent than kids in public schools? Look that up.
Even I studied in a Catholic school. Only Catholics are given.
So you want me to complete the question on that?
Actually, they force children to attend the church.
Church. For 1 hour or something.
Friday, 2 hours,
Oh,
and it's for other children. It's a total freedom. They can do whatever they want.
for what?
Only Christian students, they go to church. The other Hindus and Muslims,
Oh, they don't have to go
they
to
don't
church.
have to.
Ah,
Christian students, they must go for confession, even if they don't have anything to confess. They must go and confess.
Studies have shown that the students in Catholic schools often perform better on standardized tests compared to the public school students.
uh-huh.
However, this reflects academic performance rather than the innate intelligence.
Wow, what does that mean?
Means like they're not saying the tests do not necessarily reflect the real intelligence of the individual.
Then how come the Catholic kids perform better than the public?
Well, they may be practicing, they may be certain rigor.
They have more control of your senses or what?
Yeah, so for example, they emphasize more discipline, smaller class sizes, rigorous curriculum,
They give more
contributing
emphasis.
to better academic outcomes.
Okay.
And also the socio-economic background. They all mostly the students in Catholic schools come from families with higher socio-economic status, which correlates with better academic performance due to access to resources like tutoring, extracurriculars, and parental support.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is
Your
also
daughter in a Catholic school.
then
Huh?
what, Mara?
He should put his daughter in a Catholic school.
And then there's the Catholic schools themselves have a selective admission policy, which automatically means like public schools, they have to
They have to take everybody.
They have to take everybody.
The idiots and
Yeah.
right kids.
Whereas so that also skews the results.
Yeah.
And then the focus on the values and discipline. Catholic schools often place strong emphasis on discipline, structure, and moral values, which can positively impact students' behavior and focus, indirectly influencing academic success.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
But
those are
what I have seen is, in my experience, the children coming from the public school, they are more mature in facing the real life situations. The other kids, they
You mean the
are
Catholics are less intelligent?
not intelligent. The other kids are more
prepared
to face the real life situations, real life challenges. But the other kids are little, they are scared or they lack confidence or something.
The Catholic kids?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe. Is that your personal observation or this?
My personal.
Oh, that doesn't count.
What I have seen.
Yeah. Well, I haven't seen everything, a little bit. You need to do a full study of the question.
Okay.
Okay, I think we'll stop there. Unless there's any questions anybody has.
Yeah, any questions online?
Okay, today's past
Key takeaway.
the takeaway from today. The neophyte spiritualist is generally advised to keep aloof from the objects of the senses. But aside from that, one has to strengthen the mind by use of intelligence. If by intelligence one engages one's mind in Krishna consciousness, by complete surrender unto the Supreme Personality Godhead, then automatically the mind becomes stronger. And even though the senses are very strong, like serpents, they will be no more effective than serpents with broken fangs. But even though the soul is the master of intelligence and mind, and the senses also, still, unless it is strengthened by association with Krishna in Krishna consciousness, there is every chance of fall down due to the agitated mind. Very profound statement by Prabhupada.
Okay.
So the key statement here is that one's mind, it says, if by intelligence one engages one's mind in Krishna consciousness, as we're doing, by complete surrender unto the Supreme Personality Godhead, then automatically the mind becomes strong. And even though the senses are very strong, like serpents, they will be no more effective than serpents with broken fangs. But even though the soul is the master of the intelligence and mind, and the senses also, still, unless it is strengthened by association with Krishna in Krishna consciousness, there is every chance of falling down due to the agitated mind. You could write a whole book on that, on those 4 sentences. Yeah, I want to think about that.
Very well.
Prabhupada says the solution to the whole problem is, therefore, directly understanding the constitutional position of the soul is the solution of the whole problem. The constitutional position of the soul. Well, the soul is eternal. It
Part and parcel.
part and parcel of the Lord. It is not subject to birth, death, old age, and disease. Right? So, therefore, directly understanding the constitutional position of the soul is the solution of the whole problem. And what is that problem? It's how to control the mind. That's what it's talking about in this verse that in the purport today. Well, let's see. The verse says, the working senses are superior to dull matter. Okay. And mind is higher than the senses. And intelligence is still higher than the mind. And he, the soul, is even higher than the intelligence. Okay, so that's implying that if we can live on the level of the soul, then we can control the mind the intelligence, and the senses. And it don't matter what, yeah, but the mind, intelligence, and the senses. Okay, so therefore, in directly understanding the constitutional position of the soul is the solution of the whole problem. All right, what is the problem? The problem is that we forget Krishna, and then we become overwhelmed by Maya. So it says, in Krishna consciousness, the soul makes direct connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, the hierarchy of bodily functions, as described here, ultimately ends in the Supreme Soul. Bodily action means the functions of the senses, and stopping the senses means stopping all bodily actions. But since the mind is active, then even though the body may be silent and at rest, the mind will act, as it does during dreaming. But above the mind is the determination of the intelligence, and above the intelligence is the soul proper. If, therefore, the soul is directly engaged with the Supreme, naturally all other subordinates, namely the intelligence, the mind, and senses, will be automatically engaged. In the Katha Upanishad, there's a similar passage in which it is said that the objects of sense gratification are superior to the senses, and the mind is superior to the sense objects. If, therefore, the mind is directly engaged in the service of the Lord constantly, then there is no chance that the senses will become engaged in other ways. This mental attitude has already been explained, param dristra nivartate, which means you get a higher taste. If the mind is engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord, there is no chance of its being engaged in the lower propensities. In the Katha Upanishad, the soul has been described as Mahan, the great. Therefore, the soul is above all, namely the sense objects, senses, the mind, and the intelligence. Therefore, directly understanding the constitutional position of the soul is the solution of the whole problem. This is a very profound purport. You could write a whole book on this purport. This is real psychology.
Yes.
Much better than the books of psychology. You get a book of psychology, you can't understand what they're saying.
Vedic psychology.
They have a lot of words, but that doesn't mean you understand those words. Here, this is very clear, very, very clear. And Prabhupada said, this is the solution of the whole problem. Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Today, we should have a festival today, because we heard this purport, which gives us the solution to the whole problem. Birth, death, old age, and disease. Haribol.
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 Hare Krishna. We're wrapping